Welcome, everyone. I am John Ryan, of course. This is the Predictive Playbook Sports Betting Show. I'm pleased to have my co host, Rudy Reyes, as always, by my side. Without him, I don't think this show would be nearly as good, that's for sure. And we have a special guest today that I'm very psyched to have on. I've been on his show, and believe me, this guy is an expert guru. He's like, what do they call it? A walking bucket of fun, money making betting strategies. One of the best I've ever been on in a show. What is interesting, Rudy, is he's a national champ as a football player. How about that for starters? He's a host of a football talk show. He's owner of Access Media Group. And he also is the co-host of Coast to Coast Sports on Roku TV. Welcome to the show, Bo.
Thanks for having me on, guys. Good.
You got it.
Good.
I have one question before we get started. It may sound ridiculous, but arena football, they play it essentially in a hockey rink. Now, when you hit somebody as a cornerback, which you were, and they get kind of drilled into the boards, is that as punishing as in hockey?
Yes and no. So where it's different is the glass isn't up. So it's just a pony wall around the outside. So if somebody isn't low enough, you can knock them onto the concrete concourse. And so you could, if they were along the side, you could throw them into the stands. If they were in the end zones, you could push them out into the hallways. It was good times. It was good times. A big hit meant somebody was probably leaving the arena, which was good times. It was fun. I was a defensive player.
Maybe not on the stretcher either.
Well, and of course, it was played, they don't have field turf in there. So it's actually essentially like plywood laid down over the ice. And then it's the old school AstroTurf. So carpet, right? Laid out over that. So that's what you're playing on. So when you get tackled, it's a hard surface, no doubt.
It hurts.
I believe it. I've watched those games. I've always wondered that. So thanks for the answer.
Yeah.
Rudy, how's your week going?
Very detailed. It's good. Another day in the foggy neighborhood. You can get out a knife and carve into it if you really wanted to see more than 10 feet ahead of you. Other than that, man, I am just so psyched to be on the show. Thank you so much, John. I appreciate it. And obviously, Bo, thanks for coming on as well. Always good to have different mindsets, attitudes, demeanors. And overall, I think we're going to have a really good weekend for, a variety of reasons, from quarterbacks under center to guys that are going to be the unknowns, especially headed into not only these divisional rounds, but headed into the conference championship games for the AFC and the NFC. So I'm pretty psyched.
Yeah, no, this is going to be a good match. All the matchups this weekend are good. This last weekend definitely was a lot of lopsided games, but these ones should be a battle.
Let's hope so. I don't like walk-on games, to say the least. I would rather have a very competitive game and not necessarily worry about, who's going to score the next touchdown after they've already scored 3. So the more of a competitive game, I think the better we're going to be overall. And I think visually we'll just have a much better outcome. I think as all of these teams have history between them, between the Ravens and the 49ers, obviously the respective top seeds, AFC and the NFC, but there's just so much minutia involved in getting in the weeds of who these guys are and what they bring to the table, and under centered and linebacker position and the corner and the slot and everywhere else in the football field, including coaches. And we've seen the coaching carousel as well kind of take shape with Mike McCarthy not going anywhere after an abysmal game against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, which clearly was like the mind blower outside of the Eagles getting blown out. There's just so much not to like about each one of these head coaching decisions and who's going to be where, when, how. And obviously the bigger question is why, and what do they bring in 2024?
Yeah, McCarthy was a surprise. Before that game, I thought his job was safe if he won or if they barely lost, but getting blown out, I really thought that was going to be the catalyst for him getting potentially fired, despite the fact that he's gone 12-5 the last 3 years in a row. It's the flameouts when it matters that, I thought potentially could get him out of the room. And then I actually thought Dan Quinn would end up with a few less phone calls than he is after having probably one of the worst defenses on the field of the entire playoffs. Outside of the Eagles were that was pretty rough.
Yeah, I'm sure that was pretty brutal for all sides of the ball. Of course, with Jason Kelsey retiring, and then obviously Laurie and Sirianni are meeting today for the first time. All refuse any type of media time to address off-season things. And then, of course, Mike Tomlin for the Steelers, when asked very briefly, of course, this is viral on the internet. Everybody knows this one. Mike Tomlin's a man of few words, but when you ask the man the same question, is your future in jeopardy? And he turns around and leaves. That should be your answer.
Most ridiculous question I've ever heard.
I don't know if there's any worse of a question, John, because
especially off a loss like that.
Look at what happened when somebody asked Todd Bowles how the weather's going to affect, which is the question ever. How the I almost
he answered that like a pro though. He
did. He had to.
Yeah, I mean, if you were asked that question in the moment, it would be so hard not to laugh and be like, wait, what? Like,
yeah, exactly.
So he handled it like a champ, and so I mean, kudos to him. I don't know if I could have. I have a lot of sarcasm built up in here, and I don't know if I could have maybe not teed off on that softball a little bit.
I probably would have tried for a home run on that. Right. My face would have broken at the time she asked, and I would look at her and say, "Wait, what?"
Yeah, 100%.
It's almost like Jim Morris saying playoffs.
Exactly.
Playoffs. There are no such thing as playoffs inside of a dome. I mean, the Lions are first in hosting since '91, so that says a lot about this damn Detroit Lions team. I don't think anybody's giving them the due that they deserve. And I believe that they deserve it. Dan Campbell, look, there have been players on this roster, and I've heard several media talk shows and things of that nature from Sirius XM on to ESPN, and you have guys on there that have been through the 0-13. I mean, how do you deal with 0 0, donut, zilch, nada, nothing, and 13? How do you come back from that? What's the resilience factor? Has to be high, has to have energy associated with it. And what would be your decision? Would you quit after dual 0-13, 0-16? I couldn't even fathom. I mean, it's not as if those guys went on the field and said, you know what, we're just going to throw in the bag and we're going to get the first overall pick. It almost reminds me of the Bears, with Jay Cutler saying, well, if he doesn't play, I think they're still paying Jay Cutler. I think it's the last year of them paying Jay Cutler money. Which, there's obviously a lot of memes going on there where he's sitting on the sidelines having a cigarette and saying, okay, well, whatever, you can put someone else in. The bottom line is that the Detroit Lions deserve to be here. They have fought hard. They've been to the 0-13s and playing their first playoff game since '91 at home.
Yep.
It's unbelievable. It's just truly unbelievable. I think this is a story that keeps writing itself. I mean, and we've seen stories like Jason Kelsey decided to retire. I would have hoped Travis Kelsey retired before Jason, but anyway, that's another story for another show. I'm just not a fan of the guy, let's be honest. But Jason Kelsey retiring, 7-time Pro Bowl selection, Super Bowl champion. If that guy does not end up on the first ballot in Canton, shut me up and fuck my mama.
It's funny though, because Shefty is the one that reported that, right? That he was retiring. And then on their podcast, he said that was actually some misinformation. He hasn't officially gone one way or the other yet. He said that game was too emotional to make that decision. So we're actually not entirely sure if he has retired yet, coming from Jason Kelsey on his own podcast. But I mean, the way that team looked, it sure seemed like he's probably going to.
Well, I would have.
I don't know if I've seen a more uninspired team in a playoff game ever. It was crazy watching them because they looked like they just didn't care. It looked like they were a 4-win team that was just going through the motions in the last game of the season. Yeah. Like they played like there was no tomorrow. There's nothing to play for. They didn't care. Like, it was the weirdest looking energy from that Eagles sideline. It made no sense.
No, it didn't. It didn't. John, this is odd. So now there are eight. Now there are 8 teams, right? Baltimore Ravens, San Francisco 49ers. When have you heard that before? Well, they're both top seeds in their respective divisions, but they make their postseason debut when Houston travels to Baltimore. What's the line on that? Because I've seen a lot of disparaging numbers in regards to who opens up as a favorite.
So the Ravens are a 9-point favorite right now.
It's crazy,
right?
But the money line has them under 425. So it just kind of makes me wonder: are they that good, or are they going to cough it up like they did against the Tennessee Titans just a few years ago, when Tennessee decided to come into M&T Stadium and basically slap them around and beat them at home when Lamar Jackson was on the cusp of winning his first MVP trophy in the NFL. So,
well, I think one of the things, and this is probably one of many reasons that it's 9.5, 9. San Francisco was 10 actually to open, is the books are anticipating the public. And who's the public going to bet on? They're going to bet on the favorites and the over. Last week, from all accounts in many, many states, starting with Las Vegas, that Dallas game, of which I must commend myself, I had a 10-unit bet on Green Bay, and I was shocked as everybody else that it went the way it did. So humbly stated. However, that was one of the biggest profit games in like a decade. Because why? The line was 7.5. And what did we all think? You know, I consider myself part of the public, right? You thought that, wow, teaser, I can tease that down to 1.5. And how in the world is Dallas not going to win this game? They're giving me free money. And that was the critical mistake. Now, sometimes these irrational, exuberant situations by public betting do work out for the public, and sometimes we have the public on the same side as the pros. What I've done in the last 3 years now is I've studied sentiment since my days on Wall Street as a chief currency strategist. When you get 70% bulls in the S&P 500, you can reasonably expect some sort of top to happen. It not because we're stupid. It's just because the herd, everybody's buying, everybody's bullish. There's nothing left to buy at the top. So it's conversely the same thing at the bottom. So I've taken those little algorithms and applied it to sports betting, and it actually is very, very similar. It's almost scary similar. So with this situation, with those teasers, and Rudy, I recommend that people don't do teasers. The word itself scares me because I don't want to be a fool and be teased. Do you? No. Occasionally I will do a parlay, and we'll get I have one parlay I want to bounce off you guys later in the show. But I think that's one of the reasons why we're escalating here, and the bye week I think is getting a little bit too overrated. It's a huge advantage, but is it worth a whole touchdown? I'm not so sure about that, because I think right now, if this game was played during the regular season, Baltimore would probably be, and Baltimore's not coming off of a bye. Baltimore would probably be 4.5, the way Houston's playing right now. Sure. And the total would probably be a little bit higher, but that's kind of weather related and Baltimore's defense, et cetera, et cetera. But why don't we just segue right into a little history lesson I put together? It won't take long, and it's not.
I love history. It's my favorite subject.
Yeah, I have to agree. It was mine too, especially in college. Europe and 2 world wars. With having a doctorate professor at the helm. I couldn't wait to get to that 8 a.m. class. Anyway, home teams in the divisional round are 26-10 straight up for 72%. And I have a little graphic here we can put in here too, I think. There they are. 18-17-1 ATS. So we don't have much there, right? But the fact that these home teams are 26-10 immediately made me think of live in-game betting. So if you see pick'em on the Ravens or any of the home teams, that may be a heck of a betting opportunity. Home favorites are 7.5 or more, and 7.5 has always been a pivot point where you get some drastically different results above 7.5 and below 7.5. So 20-6, 71% straight up, and 11-18, 38%. So we have Baltimore and San Francisco as favorites above that. And look at the point is 11-18 against the spread over the last 20 seasons. I mean, that's pretty poor. They win the game, but they don't cover. Home favorites of 7 or fewer. You can see it there, 22-21 against the spread. So something a lot different. And these home teams lose more than they win, as opposed to 20-8 above, 29-15. That's about 45% more wins, but it's double the losses. Let's see, teams that earned the bye, being the top seed or previous to the 2019 season. Well, actually it's 2019 and back when we had 2 top seeds with the bye. 49-22, 69%, 33-37 ATS, 47% since 2004. Bye week top seeds in the divisional round that are favored by 7.5 more points are 22-9, 12-19 against the spread. And the last one here, teams in the divisional rounds and scored 40 or more points. Now, who in the world could we be talking about there? They have gone an anemic 1-8 straight up and 2-7 ATS. The only team to win in that upset fashion was in 2003 when the Peyton Manning-led Colts, who as a 3.5-point dog upset the Kansas City Chiefs 38-31. That works against Green Bay. But that
last line makes a lot of sense though, because when you have a big blowout or a huge emotional win, usually teams have the hardest time carrying that into the following week. So it's really common, whether it's regular season, postseason, doesn't matter. If you blow someone out or you have like a huge emotional win, it's actually one of the reasons why I'm a little worried about the Lions this week is it was such a high that it's hard to carry that emotion through the playoffs or even into the next game. So, I mean, that stat makes a ton of sense. I mean, when you watch the Vikings win that game on that last second heroics by a missed tackle by the Saints, right? What'd they do the next week? They got smacked, right? Like it's just the nature of the beast, unfortunately.
Well, it is. The interesting thing about that is that the Lions themselves have been steadily playing the way that they have been playing all season long. It's slow and steady and methodical. And when you can move the chains, get those first downs, play solid defensively, I don't know how you cannot lead with your emotions. And of course, from a betting standpoint, bet with your head, not with your emotions. So when you bet with your head, the line tells you, not to be confused with the lion, but the line tells you that you're going to have to go with the better version of this Lions team, maybe even the best version of who this Lions team is. That will get you to understand, stats are great. It's good to have them. And every player has one, especially in the divisional rounds, as we're going to witness here Saturday and Sunday. But I think, moreover, if you can play the line carefully, you can actually win money on both sides of the ball.
Sure.
You can maybe agree to disagree.
Yep.
I think the Lions have the lion's share. That is an intended pun. The lion's share of what that line actually looks like. If I was a betting guy, I'm not, but if I was, I would put more, at least 75% on the Lions and 25 on the back end on the opposing team. Why? Because you're going to win either way. And if you lose a little bit, that's what you can afford to lose. Don't lose what you can't afford to lose. And I think the Lions certainly are playing with their hair on fire, no pun on the main. But if they can continue doing what they're doing, playing like they're playing in the same methodical way they have been with Jared Goff under center, with a team that essentially didn't want him in Los Angeles because they clearly thought he was not the answer there in LA. And in lieu of dropping him off at the bus stop, waiting for Matthew Stafford to show up. Yes, they won a Super Bowl. I was there. I covered the Super Bowl. Nice. I had a chance to, talk to Matthew Stafford. I talked to Andrew Whitworth. I met Andrew at another point during the getting ready for the regular season for the Dallas Cowboys, as he was there hanging out with Brian Baldinger, and Baldy's always the entertaining guy. Always the entertaining guy, to say the least. Going back to Mike McCarthy for half a minute and the Cowboys, I didn't see any moves coming. And I know JJ gets in his way most of the time there in Dallas, and he has since 95. So it's not a big mystery when you win a Super Bowl and all of a sudden you let somebody walk. I don't know that his method was the same type of method he was going to use in keeping Mike McCarthy. I think what he should have done is maybe written a blank check to Belichick, check and Belichick, to get.
Yeah, you're on a roll, man. This is great.
That's right. Fun with puns.
Yeah.
It's Sunday, Thursday, whatever. Take your pick. Yep. But there's so many things to like about what Bill Belichick would have brought to the Dallas Cowboys. In other words, finishing games, because it's something the Dallas Cowboys have failed to do. They were so good at home all season long, one of the best home records in the NFL, and then they just wet the bed and decided to allow a team that, to me, was inferior to what they have been typically playing against. But look, 2 interceptions is too many for Dak Prescott or any quarterback, and especially in the playoffs.
Yeah. You could kind of see it coming, though. You could kind of see it coming, because you got to remember the last 2 home games, it was the Lions that they were kind of gifted that win, and against the Seahawks, that was a battle to the closing seconds. So it's not like it was, if you're looking at the body of work, sure, you're like, oh yeah, they were blowing people out. But if you look at down the stretch, their last 2 games were nail biter wins. So those weren't exactly decisive, blowing people out kind of things. No. So, I mean, you could kind of see it coming. I think the part that was a little bit shocking on the McCarthy thing is we saw something from Jerry Jones we never see. And that is he canceled all of his camera time during the week. That's something we never see. That's a guy that craves the camera, wants to be in front of it nonstop. And so you thought maybe there were going to be some wholesale changes because he was doing something he never does, which makes you think there could be other things that he never does, right? Because usually he has coaches hang around a while. He's only fired a coach after 2 or 3 years, once or twice. So I was a little surprised that nothing happened there after the actions that he took, because they're so off script for Jerry Jones.
Well, they are. And I was at Dallas Cowboys training camp. And one thing that I did notice about Jerry Jones is, yes, he was loving the camera. People were asking questions. Everybody was surrounding him. He was almost inundated, but that's something that he loves. One thing he hasn't done is, again, to get out of his own way to make sure that the team is productive down the stretch. Now, did that ultimately have anything to do with why the Cowboys melted down on the field? No, it did not. It was a lack of game planning. It was lack of execution. It was a team that fans didn't really think of was going to show up at a home game in Arlington. And oddly enough, when I was there, and of course, I'm not going to slam Dak Prescott because he played pretty good up until that fateful game. And when you're under the pressure and you can't handle it, you throw interceptions. You allow pressure to get to you from all different angles, whether it's a linebacker that's 305 to a pressure from the media, pressure from people that that are surrounding you on a daily basis. I don't know that Dak Prescott is ready for that moment, for that shining moment. And sadly enough, when I had the chance to actually meet him and to get a shout out and all that good stuff, he treated fans' memorabilia like it was garbage. Like it was of no consequence to him. He just dropped the ball constantly. And I was there behind him throwing the balls back to, I may have mentioned this on the show previously, but it's kind of indicative of Dak Prescott's mentality and how he was able to approach the season. Now, sadly, this is obviously they're going to be in Cancun or wherever they're going to travel somewhere. Well, they're not going to be in Dallas. Everybody's going to go off in the off season and have some exit interviews and things of that nature. But they really need to figure out if Dak Prescott is that guy. Now, Jerry Jones said it there in Oxnard, where they practice every single year. That's where they hold their training camp, not in Texas. And he says we don't have any plans on moving him forward or away from us at any given point in the future. So does that mean there are modifications to his contract that are forthcoming? Probably. Will they be some incentive monies? Probably, associated to getting into playoffs. And, we see stuff like DeAndre Hopkins and, reaching certain milestones of that nature. But to be honest with you, I think that's where that is for the Cowboys anyway. But now they've exited that picture. You look at the other side of that, where the Philadelphia Eagles were 12-1 headed into week 7, and then all of a sudden they just disappeared off the face.
Well, no, they were 10-1, and then they ended up going 1-5 down the stretch. So they were horrendous, and even the one win was one play away from being a loss. So I mean, it was it was bad top to bottom. But I mean, on the Dak Prescott thing, it makes sense that they're not ready to move on because they don't have the other guy in the room. When they moved on from Romo, Dak was already there, right? But when you look at production, Dak is just Romo 2.0. He's done very similar things. The numbers look kind of the same. Postseason victories are identical. So, I mean, they basically have that same guy, a little more durable, right? Romo kept getting hurt. Yeah, I mean, it's basically kind of the same guy. So I don't think they win with him. They just don't have another option.
No, they don't. But they did. Starting at training camp, they had Will Greer, sure, and they had another backup QB. So I'm thinking to myself, okay, well, this is something possible. Maybe Will Greer, a guy who failed at Carolina. Perhaps there was something that Jerry Jones seen in him. Maybe Mike McCarthy. But look, iron sharpens iron. They need these guys to bounce off one another, play against one another, and play their best against one another, especially during quarterback competition. Now, based on the salary, at least from that concept, you don't start a guy who's making Brock Purdy money over Dak Prescott. You just don't. So he was obviously the heir apparent and going to play that way. But with the Eagles, and I have to go back to Philadelphia because that was just a routing. I mean, they just got routed from the secondary with Darius Slay going down, which was very unfortunate for them. Nick Sirianni did not have these guys ready to go. Jalen Hurts' in-game play from a quarterback position was not very good. His decisions were not very good. Offensive line folded like a deck of cards. He had so much pressure on him. It was just a bad scene. If you're going to throw snowballs at anyone, throw them at Nick Sirianni. Don't throw them at Santa. Just don't, because you're going to find yourself in the worst case scenario. And I think the Eagles have a lot more questions than answers, at least at this point. And of course, we're going to find out what those are between Nick Sirianni and then Loris. And it's going to be tough to say, you know what, let's go ahead and fire Nick Sirianni. Look, head coaches don't grow on trees unless you're talking about trees from adages of people that you've played with, right? So we talk about the Sean McVay tree. We talk about all these different types of trees, and maybe some of the branches are so wilted they break off the minute you have a phone conversation, or the minute you have an interview with them and pull them into the office. Maybe they don't know how to answer those certain questions. Makes you think of Bieniemy and why he still isn't a head coach. And he obviously had accused a couple front offices of possibly not treating him fairly and not, asking him legitimate questions instead of non-legitimate questions. So, I mean, look, the bottom line is this: the Eagles have to atone for this fourth, at least the second half meltdown, or even the second quarter, third, and fourth, respectfully. I just don't know how you can come back from that. Of course, again, it is off season now for the respective aforementioned teams, but at the end of the day, I think they got it right. I think the teams that are designed to be here in the playoffs were designed to be here in the playoffs the entire time. Now, maybe the obscurity to that is Baker Mayfield and the quarterback for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, which we had seen him go through 5 different offensive coordinators. He went through 4 different teams, and a guy who just seems to not want to go away. And he beat everybody out during camp to get that spot in Tampa Bay. So something you said for Baker Mayfield, injured or not, during that game.
Yeah, I mean, Baker. Oh, go ahead.
No, that's all right, Bo. Go ahead. I'll go after you.
Oh, I was just going to say Baker's a little bit different animal because he's so wildly inconsistent. But the only time he is consistent is when he's counted out. That's when he plays his best football. If he's got a chip on his shoulder, that's when he excels. Or if he's put in a situation that he's supposed to lose, right? Like going to the Rams with 3 days notice to jump in a game, right? Those are the scenarios that you're supposed to lose that game. It's stacked against you. That's where he shines. Soon as he starts to feel himself, that's where things start to come off the rails. So, he's probably one of the hardest guys to pick. Like if you're doing pick 'em or you're doing against the spread, because you really don't know what Baker Mayfield is going to step on the field. Like, he could come out and throw 3 touchdowns, or he could come out and throw 3 picks. You really have no idea week to week. If there was ever a game that I wouldn't put money on, it's always a Baker Mayfield game, because there's just no idea what's going to happen.
Well, no, you're right. And he actually held the keys to Cleveland out of all teams in the NFL, a team that was on the rise. And did they make the right pick there with him? It was the right pick for the wrong team. Just like you had seen with Johnny Manziel, right pick, wrong team, wrong time, not the right coaching staff, not the right people in position to.
I'd argue that's the wrong pick,
right? Because they are, well, the Browns. And of course, they start off doing Browns things in the offseason by firing coaches. And yes, we understand Black Monday is obviously existent and will continue as long as the NFL is around. And I don't see it going away anytime soon. But, I think going back to Baker Mayfield, I think you're right. I believe that Baker Mayfield is a guy who continually gets counted out. And I believe he needs to wear a Tom Brady type of chip on his shoulder, to be honest with you, Bo. Reason why is because if you wear that, that enables you and enthralls you to want to play your absolute best when people are counting you out every single time that ball is snapped, every single time that ball is in your hands. If you can make it happen and make it happen down the stretch like he's done all season long, yes, during the regular season, not very good. Interception to TD ratio was iffy at best, but he has turned that around as, I believe, it's answered a lot of critics, a lot of people who basically say, you know what, Baker, okay. But when you get 3 days notice, as you well pointed out, to go start in a game, an NFL game, a live game, ready to go game, and you have those many days to study a playbook, that says a lot about your desire to get back on the field. And that's exactly where he is. And that's why he and the rest of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers team is. Now, sidebar, Todd Bowles looks like he's always having struggles with the bowel syndrome. But outside of that, Todd Bowles is a guy I don't think is having a ton of conversation around them. I don't think people are talking about the Buccaneers along the similar lines, along with the Lions as well. I think a lot to be said against, who's going to come out on top between the Lions and the Buccaneers. Sadly for Baker Mayfield, I just don't see it working his way against Detroit, in Detroit, at home with the fans, as amped and pumped up as they are going to be. This is going to be a nail biter, but at the end of the day, Detroit Lions will get it done. Now, they haven't hosted a game since 1991. That's a long time. My oldest son wasn't even born then. But I remember 91 very, very well. But when you think about that game between the Rams and the Lions, man, who got the better of the two? I think this was probably the best matchup for the Lions and the Rams, even though the Rams kind of, slowly melted into that position, into that role to be there. I don't think they clearly had an idea that they were going to be there, but the fact that they did and gave the Lions a run for their money, for crying out loud, there was 1 point differential in the game. 1 point.
And the rest of the stats were almost identical.
Yeah.
I mean, that was hands down the best game of the weekend. Like, it was the most balanced game. It was actually a game. Like, everything else was a blowout. So that was my favorite game of the weekend. And man, was it a battle. Like, you didn't know until the last second of that game.
Yeah, absolutely. So John,
now, if you were betting, you were stressed out, especially if it was one of the legs on your parlay, you were losing your mind.
That's why I don't do parlays either, but actually I did do one this week. And
who was it,
before
John?
we get to that, are you guys concerned that there's 78% of the bets, both number of tickets and about 68% of the handle on Detroit? Is that a red flag?
I still like Detroit to win. I don't have them to cover though. 6.5 is too much, because the Lions are funny in the way that they play with their food, right? In games, they should take care of business. They kind of don't. Like, you end up with defensive letdowns, stuff like that. So I like Detroit straight up, but against the spread, I'd take the Bucs.
Here's another question for you guys. And it's kind of like the handicapping process. I've been doing it for more years than I care to admit. I guess probably more years than Rudy's oldest son. Actually, more years than my oldest son, too. And I'm going to be a grandfather in about 3 weeks.
Oh, nice.
So anyway, which one do you think is better here? This first one supports Detroit. Favorites using the money line. So we're talking straight up, not necessarily betting. We're predicting who's going to win. Excellent passing team with a completion percentage of 64% or better after a game in which they allowed 6.75 or more passing yards per attempt in 4 consecutive games. That's pretty bad. But that set of parameters, 52-9, straight up. 10 seasons, 85%. That's regular season and playoffs. Now, number 2 is supports Tampa Bay. Bet on any team, money line, average defensive team allowing 18 to 23 points per game against a somewhat poor defensive team, 23 to 27 points per game, coming off a win of 21 or more points, which Tampa Bay did. That record, 51-13, straight up, 80%. So I think the first one was what, 81% or something I said? So they're similar. So if you're a novice bettor or you're filling out your at work, they do the pool thing. You pick all the winners. How do you decide who to take?
It's going to come down to your gut. I mean, you can look at all the numbers. I mean, you can look at the TDs, you can look at the interception ratio to completion, you can look at QBR, you can look at sacks, pressures, tackles for life. You can look at all those numbers and you can make your own hypothesis. But if I was a football betting guy, I would still take the Lions on this. It's small or not. Again, on the back end, sure, you could take Tampa Bay and you could put some on who's going to strike first, who's going to throw the first touchdown. That could be Baker Mayfield for all we know. He's been playing lights out. He did last weekend, and he's going to do it again in Detroit in a non-weather related game or will have no consequence.
Yeah. And a game that's not too warm.
But it's true. It's just a dumb question. But what a good question is whether or not the Lions can cover that spread. I don't think they can. It's going to be close. I just don't think they can. I to be honest with you, I think Tampa Bay could.
This feels more like a field goal type of game, not a touchdown.
Yeah, I'm with you guys. What I would plan on doing, if you guys like Detroit, what I would advise a client to do is bet maybe 50 to 70% of your normal bet size pre-flop. And then you're literally going to sit there and hope that Baker scores a touchdown first. And it must be a touchdown. I've played around with the analytics with what happens if you bet against the team that just scored the first points of the game. It's much better to wait the whole entire half, if necessary, to get that first touchdown. Now, if Detroit scores the first touchdown, and let's say Tampa Bay does come back and retakes the lead, that's another key point to add money on Detroit. That's how I would recommend it. And it's the opposite if you like Tampa Bay. If you like Tampa Bay and Detroit scores a touchdown first, you're probably going to get pretty close to 9.5, maybe 10. Because, what's the public going to do? Detroit's going to win, man. This is easy. I'm going to put more money on Detroit. I already put too much money on Detroit, but I'm going to put more on now anyway because it's a lock.
Nothing is a lock.
Sometimes we are stupid, but, at the end of the day, I hope people don't do that.
Yeah. And there is no lock. Speaking of locks, of course, I don't have any locks, at least not in the hair department. But what the lock is?
Funny today, Rudy.
Sorry, I'm on a roll. My bad.
You are, man. It's unbelievable.
Let's look at Lamar Jackson in this matchup against the Houston Texans. There's a lot to like about CJ Stroud. He is another MVP candidate. There's no question about it. Offensive Rookie of the Year, a guy who has done so much when he's on the field and hasn't really worried about a whole lot since he's been off the field, other than, look, let's get better. I was concussed. Now I'm ready to rock and roll. And he showed that. He showed that this past weekend. But on the other side of the ball, Lamar Jackson has kind of been here, done that, right? Why? Because, again, another chance at an MVP award and a guy who just continues to do amazing things. I mean, his numbers, when you look at the kind of people that are in a similar class that he is, look, he's 465 for 307, nearly a 68% completion rate, almost 2,700 yards, 24 touchdowns, and only 7 interceptions. So that's a solid QBR. I mean, that's a solid QBR. Forget the fact that he rushes and fumbles, and of course he's had a couple of those. at the end of the day. But at 102.7, exiting not last week's, but the prior week's game, so he's had a week to rest. He's only fumbled 4 times when rushing 20 plus or more yards. So that's a lot. That's a lot for him. I think he has a lot of great things moving forward. Possible MVP race candidate, at least a guy who can certainly be in that conversation. And he bet on himself during contractual obligations that he decided to put on his own shoulders, and certainly making a name for himself during this season as well, headed into this very tumultuous game. I think it's going to be against the Houston Texans.
Yeah, I can't argue that. Let's take a look at this game. I'm going to put up another graphic here. And I am somewhat enamored with Green Bay. And I think they are the hottest team right now, playing with house money. They have absolutely no fear. And they showed that when they went into Dallas and just basically, Dallas looked actually worse than the Eagles loss, I think. And both of them are horrific. So it's not making one better than the other, because it's not. But, I mean, they just took control of the game right from the start. They've had 6 consecutive games, guys, where they've scored the points first. They actually take the ball instead of deferring. And I just like that attitude, especially if you're going against arguably the best defense in the NFC, maybe the best defense in all of NFL. Get the toss. Obviously, if you win the toss, you're going to take it. If you don't, San Francisco's going to defer it. And then you set the tone for the whole first half, at least by having a scoring drive, if they can do that. I think that would be a key thing for them to do. So here's some situational trends that I found out of my database. Teams that ran more offensive plays in the previous meeting, but lost the game. On the road in the playoffs currently, facing that same foe again. Priced between a 4.5 and 10-point underdog. They only go 11-20 straight up. Point is, they win 11 times out of the 20 as a significant dog. 22-9 ATS for 71% winning bets. And the under is 19-12 for 61%, which I kind of like the under too, because if it's a lower scoring game, that is probably much more in the game than if it's like a pinball machine type of event. Teams on a 3 or more game win streak, and this applies to the Houston Texans as well. Green Bay Packers here, divisional round, priced as a dog. 24-15, 62%. But if, again, they're 4.5 to 10 points, 70% winners. Also, Packers are 6-0 against passing teams, averaging 240 or more passing yards per game in the second half of this season. 10-2 against the spread off of a road win over the last 3 seasons. I'm having a real hard time not putting a premium bet out on Green Bay here, and going to the window with a significant bet on Green Bay. So your job, guys, is to talk me out of it.
Mike Shanahan led offense. That's one key word for you. Brock Purdy also playing with house money. He's been doing it all season long. Yeah, fine. They had a 3-game losing streak, but at the end of the day, it's really about the weaponry he has around them, between Kittle, between McCaffrey, another offensive player of the year conversation piece, at least, maybe MVP. No one really talks about that because most running backs don't actually hold that title, but he could very well be there as well. Don't forget the other side of the ball. They have Warner. They have a very penetrative defense. They can get in the backfield and make most quarterbacks feel uncomfortable. Now, don't forget, Green Bay themselves are the youngest team to enter the playoffs. So it's not as if Green Bay is familiar with this, because they're not. What's more familiar with is that Mike Shanahan has been there, done that, and certainly has been here before, has done this before. And, of course, this is Brock Purdy's first playoff game. But if he plays this game, unlike the last 3 contests that were bad, I'm going to tell you this right now. At the end of the day, it's really about what Mike Shanahan's offense is going to accomplish against this very young Green Bay upfront crew, as well as in the secondary. I think they're going to piece them apart between Kittle, between Ayuk. They just have way too many weapons for the Packers to really have any type of difference.
I agree.
49ers go out on top on this one. Now, on the back end, would I have a little bit of pizza money, a couple slices, taking it off the chalk? Yeah, I'd probably give some of that. to the Packers. But at the end of the day, 49ers just have too much. They're exhibited too early and too often against this young Packers team.
Bo, I know you have another show to get to, so we're going to let you finish up your segment here. And thanks again for being on the show. You can also tell everybody where they can find you and find us when I do come on your show.
Yeah.
So the stage is yours.
Yeah, so on this one, definitely taking the Niners for no other reason than the only game that the healthy Niners lost, right? During that 3-game slide, they had guys out and important guys out. The only game really that they lost where they had all their starters healthy and on the field was against the Ravens, right? The last one doesn't count because everybody was sitting in that 3-game slide. They had a lot of guys hurt. If you threw a couple of bucks on Green Bay, sure. Right. Makes sense. The line is big enough that if you were betting straight up, you're probably, real favorable odds, but I wouldn't bet real money on it because odds are Green Bay is going home after this. And then for me, obviously you can find me on YouTube at Football-Talk. John, you'll be on there later today. And of course, if you are hanging out with me in the next hour, on Roku TV, it's our Coast to Coast daily show. And so thanks again for having me on. I got to jump off so I can get on there before it starts.
Got it. We'll see you later today.
Thanks, Bo.
Thanks, Bo.
Great having you on. There. That was good stuff from Bo. Very good stuff.
Yeah, sure was.
Bo. Yeah, I certainly appreciate his knowledge and his ability to come on the show and spend a little bit of time with us before we actually end up ending the show as well. I'm getting all choked up because Bo had to go. But there's so much to like about this 49ers team that they have been doing this all season long. Nobody expected the 49ers to be here under Brock Purdy with the guy under center, Mr. Irrelevant, now extremely relevant. Couldn't be any more relevant being the number 1 seed overall in the NFC against the Packers team. Again, another one of those situations where you look at a team that's creeping and crawling and with this, hands, maybe just trying to claw themselves into the playoffs. I think exactly what they did. I think they're fortunate to be here. I don't think they're going to go all the way, and certainly not against a 49er team that just has too much defense, too much offense. They're going to pick them apart. And look, I understand that, younger teams certainly don't get the respect because they don't have the experience. And unfortunately, that's what's going to happen. They don't have the experience. They don't have the time in. Jordan Love's first divisional game. But there's a lot to like about the Green Bay Packers moving forward. I hate to write them off before the game ever starts, but at the end of the day, again, 49ers just have too much, too early, too often. But the Packers have a lot of things going for them. And then at that point, they'll have players who have been in divisional games, who have had playoff experience, and Jordan Love will be that guy under center. What's odd about this is that when you look at Jordan Love, you look at Brett Favre and Aaron Rodgers, there's a lot of things they have in common. And one of the things they have in common is their throw style, is their timing with the ball from snap to throw under center. A lot to like about that, only because, now I'm not going to say that Aaron Rodgers and Jordan Love are like the besties or even Swifties for that matter, but there's more similarities between Brett Favre and Aaron Rodgers than there are between Aaron Rodgers and Jordan Love. But because they all have the gunslinger mentality in common, that puts them in the same conversation. I just think that the defense will be able to, help give the offense of the 49ers different looks at different times, maybe some pressures, maybe they'll back off. I just don't know that this is like a full-blown upset against the 49ers. Now, there are trap games, and, the Eagles were part of trap game conversations as well earlier in the season. Not so much now, as they're obviously not a part of the equation. But when you look at Brock Purdy, when you look at the offense, when you look at the defense, I don't know how you can consider this anything remotely considering a trap game for the 49ers. And yeah, you're right. And to Bo's point, he's not here to talk about this any further, but to Bo's point, yes, they did have a lot of injuries. They did pull some of their starters. And on the other side of the ball, the Ravens were super hot. Not that they're not hot now, but they're super hot. And they've been playing just like that all season long with Lamar Jackson under center. I remember interviewing Lamar when he was drafted by the Ravens, 32nd overall. He negotiated his own contract with the help of a few people here and there. He did get first-round money, so good for him. This contract was different because he did it himself, because he was able to make it himself, to negotiate numbers himself, which shows a lot of maturity. It shows a lot of willingness to bend but not break. And I think that overall he wanted to bet on himself, and that's exactly what he did. His numbers don't lie. His ability to get out from under center doesn't lie. His completion ratio is certainly not a falsehood. He can certainly make a game out of this. I question the defense at times for Baltimore. Yeah, they pulled their starters when they played Pittsburgh, and the Steelers needed to win this game, and they did. The problem was the Steelers didn't move on very much past Buffalo Bills. They basically shellacked them with the fake slide by Josh Allen, and they just couldn't tackle anything. We're talking about one of the colder days, not a Chiefs game where it's -5 with a wind chill of 25, but still very similar, John. Before we end the show, who are you picking in this game? Who do you have on the money line? Who are you betting and why?
Well, let's do this. Let's just do our who we think is going to win on all 4 games, and then we'll end the show that way. But I have one quick question for you. In the last 20 years, one of the characteristics of a Super Bowl champion is that they did not suffer a 3 or more game losing streak. Okay, so let's take a look at the list real quick here. If we use this as a gauge of who is actually going to have a chance to make it, that means that, first of all, the teams that did have a 3-game losing streak are obviously the San Francisco 49ers. And who was the other one here? Oh, the Packers had a 4-game losing streak, and they're playing each other. So one of them is obviously not going to be in the picture after this weekend. We already talked about that game. But interesting enough, the Lions did not have more than a single game losing streak. They didn't have back-to-back losses all year. Neither did the Ravens. Is that the Super Bowl we're going to see? I think it's possible. The Chiefs lost 2 games in a row.
Sure.
The Texans lost 2 games in a row. So do the Texans have a shot? One of those teams is going to not be here next week.
Well, process of elimination, if you really want to look at it, look, the Baltimore Ravens have gone this far because of their play style, because of play calling, because of Todd Monken, because of Jim Harbaugh. I'm not picking the Ravens to win it all, but I am picking them to move on in the AFC Championship game. Now, you look at the opposite being true of the Bills losing 3 times to the Kansas City Chiefs. So that says a lot about the Bills and their ability to close out games. They did that against Pittsburgh, who basically crawled and ultimately wet the bed during that game at Highmark Stadium. But the Bills played their game. They did what they wanted to do on both sides of the ball, and they exhibited that on basically every single down. Steelers didn't even get a first down until the second quarter. So it says a lot about how this Bills team is maybe routed a little bit differently. They did make a midseason change at offense, which I think helped out Josh Allen a little bit. But of course, Josh Allen's a residual talent. I mean, he's one of those guys where he's going to fall down, but he's going to bounce back. He's going to fall down, but he's going to bounce back. He did have fumbleitis earlier in the season. That much is accurate. He's probably had more fumbles than anybody in the NFL under center as a quarterback. But and it's hard to pick against the Chiefs for a lot of reasons. Patrick Mahomes, Travis Kelce, but we've seen them go through this roller coaster of who's going to catch, who's this, are they going to complete this all the way down the field? Who's going to be the guy who's going to step up? And of course, they have elevated, or at least they're working on elevating Sky Moore, which is what their last year's draft pick was, who certainly had made a name for himself while he was on the field. And they're going to kind of get it right, I believe. And sadly enough, man, this is going to be a good game. I don't believe that the Bills will lose against Kansas City. I think they're going to play extremely hard against them. I'm picking the Bills.
I am too. The Bills are my pick, and my pick for the show as well. I'm a little puzzled why it's only 2.5, Rudy. Is it the Mahomes effect? But Mahomes has never had a playoff game on the road.
That's
and
true.
They are different types of games. They are different environments in the playoffs. It's a lot more hostile. It's a lot more, one-sided type of a crowd, and there's going to be a ton of snow. And
There's gonna be a lot of
apparently,
snow, but both teams come from snowy climates. They both play in
that's
very
true,
cold climates, and Arrowhead's probably
and windy.
one of the coldest. Exactly. But on the road is a little bit different. This is the first
Yep.
time Mahomes has done this on the road. To your point, it's going to be tough, and I just don't see it happening. And to be honest with you, again, too much Josh Allen, too many options in the backfield. That's going to get those shots in the slant or in the wideout spot. Diggs is going to be a really strong component. But at the end of the day, I think the Bills just have a little too much for
I agree 100%.
handle, and at home, especially if Chiefs fans have to be given shovels to dig themselves out of the chairs they otherwise would be sitting in because they've expected a lot of snow to occur all week long. So, I mean, again, at the end of the day, I just think it's the Bills over the Chiefs. It's not going to be a high-scoring game. It's probably going to be somewhere in the upper teens, like maybe 17-14. It's going to be a low score because of the weather conditions, because the footballs don't like cold weather. They don't like cold temperatures. And when you kick one, they drop like lead to the bottom of the sea. So it's a battle of field position. And I think the Bills come out on top.
Yeah, and that wind direction will be key. I'll be putting out information about the weather in Buffalo because the coin toss becomes really important with that wind, the way it blows into the stadium off of the lake. And even though they're south of Buffalo, doesn't mean that it's any balmier because they're really south by about a couple miles.
Right.
So that wind is going to be a major factor as we get closer to game time. I just hope they don't have to cancel it and move it to Monday because the winner would suffer a major adverse event by having a short week.
Sure.
In a conference championship game. Right. That would be a little bit unfair. So I hope they get it in on Sunday, no matter what, but safely, of course.
Well,
Rudy, before
heaven forbid they would even go into a dome anyway. Go ahead.
Yeah, true. I'm sure there's one locally around, maybe. Syracuse has a dome somewhere. Anyway, before I let you go, Rudy, I want to thank you for being on the show first and foremost, but let everybody know the great work that you're doing on iHeartRadio and the Rude Dog Show and anything else you want to promote.
Oh, sure. Absolutely. I'm going to be part of NGBN TV, which is basically a television network for men in their 40s, 50s, and 60s. That'll be starting probably within the next couple of weeks. There'll be a sneak peek. So go to ngbn.tv. And if you like the news and you like that kind of thing, go and download the iHeartRadio app and check out KVTA. I'm there from 11 a.m. till 5:30 p.m. Pacific time. And of course, the Rude Dog Show always have good guests. And of course, the Rude Dog Show will be on NGBN TV. So, hi, Zen. Thank you. Appreciate it. Hello back to you. Thanks for tuning in. We certainly appreciate it. Like it, love it, share it, but never leave it. Thank you, Zen.
Yeah, there you go. I do have a 10-unit max bet going for those that want to get some, a little bit more than pizza money involved. And, I try not to blow hype or anything like that because gambling, none of us have a crystal ball. And my advice to everybody is that whether you get my picks or not, if you find a handicapper that uses the word locks, you're going to cash this ticket. All you have to do is buy it. I would run and maybe buy a snow shovel or something with the money that you would have paid for the bet. Right. I hope that made sense because let's put it this way. I'd rather buy a 6-pack and drink them all in an hour, which would be bad, right? Than pay somebody $25 for a bunch of crap. I would much rather do that. But anyways, then Carla's on the show here. Thanks for watching. Of course, I'm going to be on her platform very soon, Rudy. I think they're setting up actually a day. They do it every Tuesday, I believe it is. And I think they're setting up a day so we don't have to wait till February to get me on, which is great. Appreciated by me, what they're doing to get me on the show. So that's cool. Anyway, we always end the show with the most important thing of the show. And I'm going to tell you all right now is to bet with your head, never over it. And may all the wins be yours. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next week.